have about a minute, a little short video clip to get us started this morning. And I invite you to look forward.
A ruling party lawmaker threw a shoe at the Speaker of Taiwan's legislature, and assorted colleagues engaged in protracting pushing and shoving as the final day of the winter legislative session dissolved into disarray. Friday's trouble erupted when dozens of lawmakers from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party stormed the Speaker's dais to prevent voting on a proposal to change the composition of the Central Election Commission. Opposition nationalists responded to the Democratic Progressive Party's move by rushing forward to protect Speaker Wang Jinping, one of the nationalist senior members. Taiwan's legislature has had a reputation for violent incidents ever since the dismantling of martial law in 1987. Friday's brawls followed a motion by the opposition, which holds a slim majority at the 219-seat legislature, asking for the Central Election Commission to be selected according to the party's electoral strength.
But what we just saw was a video clip of Taiwan's legislature in action. On one level, the video is pretty disturbing because it shows what can happen when people get out of hand. And when I first saw the video, I thought to myself, well, this is not going on in our government here in the United States. Might as well be. You see, when you get right down to it, there's not much of a distinction between what we just saw and the hateful, demeaning, mean-spirited language we hear now in America. Frankly, we sometimes forget that words are just as destructive as fists. Words may not break bones, but they can damage the soul of both the speaker and the hearer. But the video we just saw is an illustration of something else that is troubling, very troubling, and that is our down deep human need to be right. An article not long ago in Psychology Today states, one of the most prevalent and damaging themes in our culture is the need to be right. It is so deeply embedded in our belief system and in our collective psyche that we never pause to consider it. I believe that the words of this article are not only correct, but a profoundly sad and tragic commentary of where many are in our culture today. The need to be right is pervasive and cuts across every demographic category and every single issue. Whether taxes, freedom of speech, college tuition rates, public school teachers, unions, global warming, gay marriage, war, the death penalty, base village, dogs on trails, hydro plants, the Rio Grande Trail, fire department funding, and plastic bags at grocery stores, there are countless issues that cause blood pressures to rise, faces to redden, speech to degrade, and the severing of relationships with one another. And across these and every other conceivable issue is not only a pervasive and passionate need to be right, but for the other with whom we disagree to be wrong. And what is incredibly sad to me is that often people choose to be right at the cost of damaging a relationship with another human being. Opinions now matter more than person. And people are in the dichotomous categories of being in the right group or the wrong group. So much is seen as black and white that if you're on the wrong side of something, you are not only considered to be mistaken, stupid, uneducated, phobic, and narrow-minded, but a bad person to the core. No ifs, ands, or buts. This need to be right consumes the time, attention, and vast resources of so many. And with this in mind, I'd like for a moment just to take a brief look at the life of Jesus. And in particular, I'd like to briefly explore what it is that impressed him most about people and who it is that he tended to commend. Now, in all four Gospels, there are a ton of examples of the kinds of people, actions, and characteristics that Jesus extolled. Here are just a few. Take chapter 7 of the Gospel of Luke. Jesus goes to dinner at a house. Most of the people at the dinner are prominent leaders in the community. The food's great, the wine's not bad, the discussions are heady and intellectual, and it's in the midst of this scene that a woman sits next to Jesus and wipes his feet with her tears and pours perfume on them. Sure, it sounds like a strange custom in 2012, but feet were dirty in those days. And for the woman to care for Jesus this way in the midst of an elegant dinner party was not only a departure from decorum, but a radical act of compassion, kindness. And Jesus commends the woman and uses her actions to teach people about what he expects. Then in the 8th chapter of Matthew, there's a story of the Roman military officer, the centurion, the guy who's in charge of 100 troops. His servant is sick, so he goes to Jesus and he asks him for help. The centurion doesn't tell Jesus what to do, rather, he accepts what Jesus tells him at face value. And Jesus uses the centurion to extol his virtues and what we should be focused upon. Then there's the story of Mary and Martha in Luke's gospel. Jesus goes to this house by a woman named Martha. Her sister Mary is there, and Martha works frantically in the kitchen to prepare things. And Mary sits around with Jesus, hearing what he has to say. And Jesus commends Mary for being one who listens instead of one who's focused on all the details of getting things done. And there are the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. He's on a mountainside, and he uses his place to teach his followers about his hopes and his expectations for his followers and for their future. And what's interesting is that in the Sermon on the Mount, what's very interesting is what is missing from his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. Nowhere in the Sermon on the Mount does Jesus say the most important thing in life is to be right. And to keep in mind that when you are right, others are wrong. And if you look at who impressed Jesus and what he commended, a few of the examples I just gave you of the centurion and Mary and Martha and the woman wiping Jesus' feet and the countless other examples, nowhere in the Gospels can you find Jesus being enamored with people who are passionate and focused on being right. In fact, just the opposite. The one thing that got to Jesus more than anything else were those who insisted on being right at the expense of another human being. At its core, nowhere that I can find do the Gospels say that being a Christian and a Christ follower is about being right. And so if being right is not what it's about, if it's not where our passion should lie, if it's not the number one thing, then what is? Well, the answer is pretty clearly stated in our gospel reading today. First, a little background. Jesus was in the midst of this long, protracted period of conflict with all kinds of people. People were challenged and upset with Jesus for what he was saying. Whether the topic was marriage or taxes or how the temple was being run or how resources were being used, the religious leaders were furious with Jesus. And it was a protracted period of conflict. And convinced that they were right and that Jesus was wrong, they were looking for a way to get this guy thrown in jail. What's in the midst of venomous, who is right and who's wrong talk, that someone, probably a rabbi, comes up to Jesus and says, "Look, Jesus, when you take a look at everything, when you take a look at everything in life, when you take a look at the 1,613 laws that we have as Jews, when you think about all of the things throughout Israel that people are debating and talking about and arguing about, when you get right down to it, Jesus, tell me, what is the most important thing for us to keep in mind?" And without pause, without hesitation, Jesus says the answer is clear, straightforward, and not at all complicated. The one thing that matters more than anything else is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus says, there is nothing more important, period. No buts, no ands, no ors, period. That's it. That's the whole bailiwick. That's the deal. Said another way, God does not call us to be right. God calls us to be loving. I think you've heard me say this before. Love trumps everything. Love is more important than being right. And in the end, what matters is that we love, not that we were right. And what is astounding to me is that this very simple message of Jesus, that love trumps everything, is what got him killed. Love got Jesus killed. Right now in America, mainline churches and even standalone parishes are being ripped apart by those who need to be right. Doesn't matter what the issue is, whether the topic has to do with worship styles, contemporary versus traditional music, the language used in liturgy, the version of the Bible read, the place of gaze, environmental issues, just to name a few. Christians all over America are focused and passionate on being right more than they are on love. You probably know this about me, but you need to know this about me. And that is, as pastor here, I really have one focus and one focus only. And that is that Jesus is God, that Jesus died on the cross for us, that Jesus rose again and was resurrected, and that you and I have eternal life ahead. That is the gospel message. And frankly, everything else to me is secondary. If I am ever forced to choose in this chapel or anywhere else between being right on any issue and being loving, I will always choose the latter, because in the end, I would rather err on the side of love than on the side of being right on any issue. In our culture, in this valley and nation, we are consumed with the need to be right. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it comes with our human need to be in control. Maybe it comes from our egos. Maybe it comes from insecurities. Maybe it comes from an educational system that rewards right answers more than great questions. Maybe it's from the fact that everything is set up to be competitive. I don't know where this comes from, but it's part of who we are. But what I will say, and what is important, is that because love trumps everything, as Jesus said, it's important to take just a moment and highlight what love is and what love is not. First, just very brief thoughts on what love does not mean. Love doesn't mean we don't have opinions. Of course we have opinions. Love doesn't mean that we don't confront social injustices. Of course we do. Love doesn't mean that we should go around using politically correct language just because we want people to be happy with us. Love doesn't mean we let others walk all over us, that we ever allow ourselves to take abuse or act like martyrs or put up with maltreatment or dispense with boundaries. That's not what love is. Love doesn't mean that we create unhealthy relational dependencies with others. Love is clearly never, ever, 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 ever about being harsh or mean-spirited or demeaning or degrading or cruel or mean-hearted, like all the language we hear all over America today. That has nothing to do with love. Selfishness or being self-serving has nothing to do with love. Nor does love mean being fickle in our commitments and treating commitments like a light switch on and off. And I love the song, but love is not about loving the one you're with if you are not with the one you love. And the dumbest thing I ever heard about love is that love is never having to say you're sorry. What hogwash was that in that movie so long ago? But what is love? Here's a short list with a ton left out. Love is about wanting the best for the person that is next to you, even if it means the person next to you ends up being more successful or ahead of you in some other kind of way. Love is seeking wholeness for the other person. A loving relationship is where you become more of who you are, not less. Love is, and this is a hard one, love is about allowing people to be different than you. As you look at creation, is creation all the same? Are flowers all the same color? Are mountains all the same height? Are rivers all the same depth? Are oceans all the same? They're vastly different. Love is about allowing people to be different. Love is about having a heart and soul grounded in a spirit of forgiveness. Love is about loyalty and commitment and fidelity and a willingness to speak hard truths. It's about honesty. It's about building other people up. And it is about talking about people behind their backs, saying how great they are. Love is about being willing to back off and letting go of the need to control another human being. Love is about maintaining boundaries, about being vulnerable, and seeing and seeking God in the other. And love is clearly what Paul said it was in the 13th chapter of his letter to the Corinthians. You know these words, but here are the words from a different version of the Bible. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love does not want what it does not have. Love doesn't strut around with a swollen head. Love isn't always me first. Love doesn't fly off the handle or keep score. Love doesn't take pleasure in the flowering of truth. Love trusts God, always looks for the best. What great words. I pray that each of us are going to do the really, really hard work, the hardest work of all, the highest calling of all, to do the work through our lives that demonstrate through word and action that love trumps everything. I pray that we're going to be a chapel that is really not concerned about being right at all, but rather about being loving. I pray that each of us will be countercultural and will be willing to step outside of the norm and remove ourselves anytime we're in the midst of a venomous right-wrong discussion. And I pray that the phrase, love trumps everything, is going to be ingrained down to our bone marrow. What do you think about that phrase? Love trumps everything. Love trumps everything. Paul wrote about it in his letters to the very first Christian communities. God said it throughout the Old Testament. And Jesus made that point crystal clear in the Gospels. Let us pray.